Hi, I'm David Terrar and welcome to our live stream news and interview show, Cloud Industry Forum presents TWF. And I'm in our mixed reality newsroom studio courtesy of our friends at Disruptive Live. I'm CEO of the Cloud Industry Forum, which is a not-for-profit membership trade body that champions and helps accelerate the adoption of cloud technology and services. We've got members like Lenovo and Kaiser PR and Broadcom and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. If you want to find out more, we're at cloudindustryforum.org. TWF goes live on Mondays at 10 o'clock. Thanks for being here. Each week we start with tech stories or an opinion piece or something that sparked our interest, and then we interview a guest. Today we're talking cloud and AI and the future of cloud with a friend and analyst from our partner Bloor Research. More on that later. We are on the lookout for guests to come on the show, so if you're doing something that supports or is supported by secure and trusted cloud technology, then we'd like to hear from you. You can connect with us here on LinkedIn, put something in the comments. You can email us at info@cloudindustryforum.org. I'm at DT on X, I'm David_Terrar on Threads. Google me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Today's news and opinion section is actually triggered by two very different events that I went to last week. On Wednesday, I was at the Houses of Parliament for a PICTFOR meeting, and that stands for Parliamentary Internet Communications and Technology Forum, we're a member, and they were discussing tackling online toxicity and misogyny. Sadly, I was one of only 3 males in the audience. They were asking the question, will the online safety bill that's just received royal assent and Ofcom's subsequent guidance be robust enough to tackle any unforeseen gender-biased online harms, toxicity and misogyny? It was explained that the bill has been 6 years in the making, would you believe? It was also highlighted that when the bill was first introduced to Parliament in 2022, there was not one mention of women or girls in all of its 225 pages, which demonstrates the problem with some intense irony. Carolyn Dinage MP, who is the event chair, told us that now there are 6 mentions of women and girls in the Act. The bill introduces regulation of online spaces such as social media and search engines. New duties will be placed on the tech companies to ensure their users are safe. The discussion covered things like deepfakes and fake nudes, and I learned a new word, cyberflashing, which will become a criminal offence because of the Act. What also struck me was that there was a lot of guidance and codes of practice that are in draft form now. Won't actually be agreed until autumn 2024, and only then put in front of Parliament. Now, this is a really complex area, and I know I've got a lot to learn about what is and isn't in the bill, along with the current state and sophistication of the potential harms. One of the many worrying things raised in the discussion was that Ofcom will have to publish guidance for tech companies about protecting women and girls when a violence against women and girls' code of practice is what's really needed, and it would be much more effective than just guidance. My lasting impression was that of the event was actually of being reminded of the gender bias that women have to put up with in our sector, in their lives, day in, day out. I'm ashamed to say that I've never read a book that was brought up in the Q&A section called Invisible Women by Carolyn Prado Perez. I've fixed that. I've just started reading it on my Kindle. It's over there. Very important. So, changing gear, on Tuesday last week, I attended an event at Plexel at Here East in the building that was originally the media centre for the 2012 Olympics. Great to be an event in the East End and not far from where I live. It was titled Envisioning London 2050. Answering the question, there was an excellent keynote speech by futurist Amelia Kallman, followed by a panel session and then some networking. So what did I learn about how smart London will be in 27 years? By 2050, nearly 80% of the world's population is expected to live in cities, and we'll likely be at 9.7 billion people on the planet by then. It's estimated that the temperature of London will be increased by around 3 degrees Celsius, so we'll have wetter winters and hotter summers. 38% of the city could be heated by rerouting heat from the underground system, which is interesting. Today, 18% of London is covered by greenery. The Mayor aims to increase the biodiversity to make that 50% by 2050. and reduce the overheating by adding moisture to the air. Between now and then, we've got challenges. Global GDP is at 3% growth rate. It's the lowest it's been in years. There's the potential for AI to take our jobs. Should we be thinking about universal basic income? Or is all this an opportunity? And we could all be using GenAI as it accelerates in effectiveness. London could have vertical farms supplying food as well as moisture. Now, we've got a very strong tech and startup sector here in London, quite a community. We'll need to make sure that we are an attractive place for those companies to come and for the investors. As a city community, we'll need to rethink and reuse our spaces. We're used to hybrid working now since COVID, but we'll have to maybe rethink the future of work to promote socialisation and do things differently. We need to think seriously about these issues now to prepare. And I agree with Amelia that in 2023, this year, we're at a pivotal point. Don't forget that Invisible Women book, and so to our guest. Today's guest comes from the analyst community, but he and I have a lot of crossover in our technology backgrounds. He's Research Director for IT and Infrastructure at Bloor Research, who we partner with, and we're going to be talking about various aspects of cloud and AI and what comes next. Paul Bevan, welcome to the show. Please, can you introduce yourself and what you do for Bloor?
Thank you. Morning, David. Introduce myself. So my history goes back to 1976, which probably the grey hairs will tell you that's that far back. And I split it into probably 3 bits. First is 8 years in logistics. So I'm known as a bit of an old trucker at times, before joining what was then Burroughs in 1984 to sell logistics solutions back to the industry, so using my vertical knowledge. And since then, really right through to about 2008, as a corporate player in sales and marketing in the IT industry, mostly with Unisys, sometimes with Siemens Nixdorf for a short period, before coming out and sort of going out on my own as a product marketing consultant. Yeah, because my background and sort of orientation has very much been around strategic and product marketing over the years. And that sort of period from 2008 onwards, 2009 onwards, interesting, lots of different experiences. One of the things that you start to realize is that IT analyst, which is where I've ended up, is very much a sort of mix of product marketing and sort of consulting and helping navigate people between the challenges in sort of modern IT. So it was really a sort of slow move from marketing into analysis. And being approached by Bloor in 2016, I was working on some data center analysis, having spent some time at Equinix, and asked if I would like to come and set up an infrastructure practice, because Bloor, small independent analyst house that's been around for 30, 40 years now, very much focused on data and security, didn't really have an infrastructure practice. And so that's what I've been doing for the last, seven years or so.
And it's been fun. Excellent stuff. That's great, Paul. And obviously, when I was saying about the common things in our background, I used to work for a big hardware vendor too. So get where you're coming from. When it comes to cloud and infrastructure, what are the interesting things that you're seeing now?
Well, I've thought long and hard about this because, there's so many things going on. But as an infrastructure, if I'm responsible for infrastructure, I thought I'd sort of focus on a couple of infrastructure pieces. So the first one that I think that's intriguing at the moment and could have some implications moving forward is this, you might want to call it the sort of chip wars. And it's really the sort of emergence as ARM into the cloud and server space. And also people like Foxconn coming along, and obviously Nvidia with their GPUs, starting to cause real problems, I think, for Intel in the sort of medium and maybe even the long term. And it's interesting that Pat Gelsinger at Intel tried to dismiss, if you like, the importance of ARM in a recent briefing. And you sort of think, is he going to go down in history as sort of one of these people who didn't see something changing around him. I mean, Intel's not going to disappear anytime soon, but the way in which, and we'll come back to AI, I'm sure, has started to change the way systems are put together, and the power requirements and the sort of performance requirements required have allowed other players to come in. I think Intel missed that sort of inflection point, and I kept trying to catch up rapidly. So I think we're going to see some really interesting things going on. I mean, the level of number of transistors on a chip, the actual power requirements, we're starting to see now things that have been sort of mooted for many, many years, that we would see, high density compute in data centers is really coming to fruition, I think, and actually got some challenges for the main players. And one that comes to mind particularly, is this lack of or the potential problem of supply of GPUs for AI processing. And a deal done by a company called CoreWeaver with NVIDIA to get access to, first access, if you like, to GPUs. They secured, I think it was about $450 million debt funding round to help them set up basically data centers, cloud data centers for AI. And really interesting one that might just cause some problems for the likes of Google and Microsoft and AWS, who are having to do deals with Oracle. If you look at the sort of latest announcement from Microsoft, to offload some of the AI processing into the Oracle cloud, and potential for people throttling AI systems because there simply isn't enough power. They simply haven't got the capability of meeting the demand for AI. So CoreWeave, this CoreWeave, I think, as a pure AI cloud player from a sort of infrastructure perspective, might be quite interesting. So and where does Intel go? And will it ever be quite as dominant as it once was? Is another interesting question. And I suppose the corollary of that, David, is the impact that's going to have on sustainability. So again, part of my brief, I think, and seeing a lot more interest is what's happening from a sustainability point of view, and you have to look there at immersion cooling. And I think immersion cooling is going to be the next big thing over the coming years. If you don't want to have a hurricane of air controlled cooling in data centers. I mean, I've seen the figures that said at the current rate of growth of transistors and the heat they generate, you're going to get wind speeds of sort of 40 or 50 miles an hour inside your data centers if you don't use a different way of cooling the microprocessors. So I think things like immersion cooling is something that everybody's going to have to look at. Has some challenges in terms of the way you engineer that in the data center. So again, new players might come in who find it darn sight easier to deliver. So I think there's some interesting potential for new competition, perhaps, and challenges to the traditional environment in that sort of structure. And this is a sort of discussion that go on and on and on. You can go into all sorts of other spheres, but I thought I'd keep it to infrastructure.
No, it's very important. And you're right to kind of highlight the fact that Intel might be having their Nokia moment, as it were. And the crossover between the games chips and business-oriented companies like Intel. Interesting. And you mentioned the big three. What do you think about the recent Ofcom reports that's triggered the Competition and Markets Authority investigation about in the practices of those big three?
I think it's fairly timely. I think it's been overdue. This is an ongoing sort of debate, discussion. No, I won't call it a battle between big tech and consumers and regulators. It doesn't matter whether it's cloud or if we go back into our history, David. Into some of the sort of look at sort of monopoly positions, whether it was AT&T in telco or IBM in the mainframe space. This is an ongoing battle, I think, between the desires of big tech to be clear of and free to do what they want to do, and actually getting the balance right. So I think it's timely, particularly things like egress charges, something that's focusing people's minds. Interoperability is an issue, and genuine intro. There's been loads of progress made on making software portable, making systems portable, but there are still sort of gotchas in the cloud world. So I think need looking at. And the big one, and I'm hearing it's more and more from end users, is the whole software licensing approach. And here it's interesting that you're getting AWS, Google, and Google sort of pointing the finger very firmly at Microsoft, though I dare say they could probably point the finger back the other way as well. And that whole sort of software licensing in the cloud, whether it's the big three or just the whole move to SaaS, I think needs a lot of looking at. And to me, a lot of that is at the antithesis of genuine cloud, i.e. pay-per-use, scale up and down at will. Most software licensing is not really in that mode. It's, you could almost say it's like an old outsourcing contract or a managed service contract. It really doesn't have some of the flexibility, I think, of cloud, and a lot of customers are saying there's some real hikes in prices going on at the moment in software in the cloud. So I think timely. It'll, and it will be a long, arduous process. We saw it with the Activision, Microsoft takeover of Activision, the CMA getting involved there, and how difficult and how awkward that gets. But it's one that needs to happen.
Excellent. Now, you've mentioned the word already. Obviously the big thing for 2023 is generative AI. So how do you think that changes things? I mean, are all the companies running to use it to help them do a better job, provide better customer service? What effects is it going to have?
I think are all companies running towards it? Yes, they are. Whether they know quite why they're running towards it, I'm less clear. And one of the things that the huge amount of hype, and a lot of people doing a lot of early, piloting and testing. Are we seeing whole-scale changes yet? But I think if you look at all the reports you're seeing coming out, whether it's McKinsey or it's Gartner putting out major reports about the adoption and what people are doing, two things come straight away is that pretty much any significant business is looking at the potential for generative AI and large language models, but they're at the very early phase of working out what it's going to do for them. And some areas have jumped in very, very fast. Sales and marketing, for example, seems to be at the sort of forefront of how can it use generative AI to help drive new sales, etc. And I think what generative AI is doing, I think is I'm not sure it's the right term. It's democratizing AI. A lot of what's going on in AI has been around for a long time. Even the algorithms have been here for decades. AI has been around for a long time, but it's actually not been particularly easy for the individual or the small company or any to get to grips with what you can get out of this. And I think the way in which the large language models work make it a darn sight easier to understand how you get something out of it. And it will have tremendous impact in the future. Is it having it now? No, it's limited. I mean, AI is having huge impact. The change impact of generative AI, large language models, is yet to be seen. But obviously, I think if you democratize anything and you make it easier for people to use, then you're going to see a huge increase in what's going on.
Excellent. Now, Paul, can you swap your glasses for your smart glasses and look into the future and tell us where you think the cloud will be in the next 3 to 5 years?
Funnily enough, when you've sort of asked that question, you think 3 to 5 years sounds like a long time, but I don't see there being any huge change in 3 to 5 years. And a lot of the reason is I think we're in a phase of consolidation. I won't say consolidation in terms of takeovers and things like that, but I think from a socioeconomic and political point of view, there are challenges out there, and I think the whole focus at the moment is on cost optimization, is on making the most of what you've got, while trying to find the new areas that can make a big difference. So, you talk to end users, you talk to organizations, and their challenge is, how do I increase productivity in an environment, difficult environment, challenging environments, uncertain environments? And that, so I think a lot of the work you will see will be to try and get a grip on potential costs, the way in which things work, rather than, if you look at cloud in 5 years' time, will there be a completely new operating model? Will there be something so new that it's sort of really disruptive and changes the cloud world as opposed to changing business? Then I think the cloud will look pretty much the same. But clearly there's a whole load of work going on various elements, particularly of AI, that could have profound effects on us. But I think in a 3 to 5 year timescale, we can be having this conversation in 5 years and say, have we got to grips with, the sort of cost optimization, the productivity issues, all those sort of things? Or has somebody jumped to a completely new paradigm? And I think the answer is we'll still be dealing with the latter. So I'm sorry to be slightly dumb, but I don't see much change. There will still be the big three, with one or two other players trying to nose their way in terms of the cloud, or service providers themselves. Lots of things going on in the background, but fundamentally I see there's a sort of productivity push, whether that's in DevOps and platform engineering and all those sort of things, is really to try and get to grips with the sort of cost and productivity issues in the world generally, and cloud, helping that along the way, but moving from being a bit of a cottage industry to being much more process oriented and more production oriented, rather than sort of cottage industry, hang it all together and see what breaks and what doesn't.
Got it. Fascinating. So I've only got 2 more questions for you. Would you like to leave the audience with any extra advice on navigating the cloud landscape?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that sort of keep cropping up, I think. One is, and particularly this refers very much to software as a service. I mean, and here I really say to people, don't forget that this is the whole of the cloud is a shared responsibility model. And I'm seeing an awful lot of people who are sort of jumping into SaaS and handing over not only responsibility, but almost accountability. They're stopping realizing they're still accountable for what's going on. So the way in which you need to organize your IT operations, your whole sort of governance structures, so don't forget it's shared responsibility, and you cannot expect to be able to assure your boards, your execs, that things are under control if you do not have that shared responsibility with your cloud service providers, or whatever, whether that's SaaS, PaaS, or infrastructure as a service. So I think that's number one. Don't forget shared responsibility. The second one, and if you're in the phase, I think if customers are in the phase of, like, they've sort of done the low-hanging fruit, and they're now looking at the more serious migrations that they need to do as part of their digital transformations, is one thing absolutely is know before you go. Now, in the past, people have had to, use consultancies to spend ages trying to map out what the implications will be and what to migrate and what the performance will be. But I think there's a whole bunch of tools out there now that will help you model and assess how your applications can be migrated and how they will perform in the cloud, and which cloud too. Will they perform differently under AWS or Google or Azure or any other cloud? And I think people, particularly in COVID, jumped into those, whether it's sort of lift and shift or just very rapid migrations to the cloud without really considering how it was going to work. And that's why there's been a lot of talk about repatriation. There's been a lot of talk about cost optimization. I think, the cloud is the future. I think the cloud has all sorts of benefits. It isn't necessarily a cost benefit in the short term. But I think it's imperative that you get this attitude of know what it's going to perform like before you jump.
Excellent. Well, finally, the podcast that you're involved with, tell us about that and how do people find it?
Oh, dear. Yeah. Cloud State of Play. Cloud State of Play with a guy called Richard Simon, who is known as the Cloud Therapist on YouTube. I think we met at sort of one of those big sort of shows, probably down at Excel, and got talking and found that we had this sort of shared passion for sort of picking holes in and getting underneath that. Richard is an out and out cloud native, enthusiast, I think is the best way to put it. He's CTO at T Systems, interesting character. And we have a monthly get together called the Cloud State of Play. And you can find it on YouTube just by doing YouTube Cloud State of Play. And we also run, this on the Bloor website as well. So he and I have been doing this for over a year now. And we pick 3 topics each month and have a little bit of a rant and pick over it, but he comes at it from a very much a cloud native point of view. And I come at it from, slightly jaundiced, 30, 40 years in IT and the issues that people have of trying to migrate, to try and find that sort of sensible middle path. And it's some interesting conversations, and we go quite broadly across the cloud, but it's probably worth a look. But as I say, if you go YouTube Cloud State of Play, you'll find us.
That's good content, well worth going to watch. Paul, that has been awesome. Some great insights and things to think about. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, thank you, David. Good to speak to you, and bye, everybody.
Well, I hope you agree with me that Paul's insights were really valuable. And third reminder, don't forget that Invisible Women book. And lastly, I hope you enjoyed the show. We are live streamed 10 o'clock Mondays. Hope to see you next week. Thanks very much.